Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal. Willow felt the ground beneath her vanish as if the entire world had collapsed into an endless void, swallowing her whole in the instant Curtis appeared unannounced at the bridal preparation room. Draped in her flowing white gown, veil delicately pinned atop her soft curls, she was moments away from what should have been a celebration of love and new beginnings. Yet Curtis's sudden arrival, his face carved with grim urgency, shattered that illusion like glass beneath a hammer. The room, once filled with hushed anticipation and final touches of wedding joy, became a suffocating chamber of dread. Curtis didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. Each word he spoke, heavy and deliberate, struck with the force of a gunshot. When he revealed that Drew, her fiancé, her supposed protector, had slept with Nina, her own mother, the air was torn from Willow's lungs. Every cell in her body recoiled as if stung by betrayal's venom. Her mind raced to deny it, to conjure some explanation, some misunderstanding, but there was none. Curtis's voice trembled with truth, and Willow's body froze as though her blood had turned to ice. Her chest tightened, her hands trembled, and the white veil suddenly felt like a noose tightening around her neck. She couldn't breathe. The man she had prepared to commit her life to, the one she believed was her partner in healing, had been deceiving her on the most intimate, grotesque level imaginable. The man who had looked into her eyes and promised devotion had, behind her back, violated the last sanctuary she thought she had, family. Disgust. Humiliation. Heartbreak. They clashed violently within her like tidal waves in a storm, overwhelming her, threatening to drown her where she stood. She wanted to scream, to rip the gown from her body and flee from the church, from Drew, from everything. But the ceremony was minutes away. Scout had already handed her a lovingly prepared frame of the two of them together. Guests were seated, flowers arranged, cameras ready to capture a moment now tainted by horror. And far worse than appearances or embarrassment, Willow knew she was trapped. Trapped by a secret Drew held over her like a blade at her throat. Only days earlier, during one of her unexplainable mental spirals, Willow had found herself outside the hospital, dazed and disoriented. Sasha's baby, Daisy, had vanished. No one knew how or why. But Willow did. She just didn't remember it all, only fragments of her wandering, of something soft and warm in her arms, of waking up near the edge of town with dirt on her feet and blood under her nails. Drew had pieced it all together. He had secured footage from a security camera. A grainy yet damning image of Willow, barefoot and incoherent, carrying Daisy into the night. The medication he had slipped into her tea, under the guise of stress relief, had triggered a breakdown severe enough for her to lose control. And Drew had been watching, waiting. He never helped her. He documented it. The footage was now his weapon. A single email from Drew to the authorities, and Willow would lose everything, her medical license, her freedom, and most devastatingly, custody of Wiley. Drew didn't need to threaten her out loud. The implication hung like a guillotine above her head. He reminded her gently that marriage was best for everyone. That her instability could be managed under his guidance. That keeping quiet would protect the children. But Willow understood the truth. She wasn't walking into a marriage, she was walking into a prison built from betrayal, fear, and psychological warfare. As she stepped into the church, hand clutching her bouquet so tightly her knuckles turned white, Willow's gaze was lifeless. She didn't see the floral arrangements or hear the music playing softly in the background. She didn't notice the smiles of the guests or the proud look in Drew's eyes as he waited at the altar. All she saw was the man who destroyed her, smiling like he had won. Dressed in a custom tuxedo, with the confidence of a man who believed he had orchestrated the perfect life, Drew radiated smug satisfaction. He thought he had outsmarted everyone. That the ceremony would seal his victory. That Willow, silenced and broken, would never leave him now. He thought her silence meant compliance. But beneath the veil of forced serenity and internal agony, something began to stir within Willow. Not hope, hope had abandoned her. But a flicker of defiance, the final remnants of her true self not yet extinguished. She walked toward him like a shadow, each step heavy with dread. Her soul screamed behind her placid smile, her fingers tingled with numbness, and still, she kept walking. Drew believed that the wedding would be the crowning moment of his manipulation, the binding tie that would keep Willow under his control forever. He envisioned their vows as the chains that would secure her to him, make her his possession not just in private but in public eyes as well. He didn't see a woman, he saw a trophy, a symbol of conquest. The wedding wasn't about love. It was about domination, about parading her submission to the world. What he didn't expect, what none of them expected, was the thunderous crash of truth that would come moments later. Because fate, however cruel, sometimes chooses to act through unexpected allies. And just as the priest prepared to speak, a commanding voice rang out from the church entrance. A woman no one recognized at first stepped into the light, older, dignified, with eyes that pierced like daggers through the illusion Drew had created. The room turned toward her in collective shock. It was Monica Quartermain's long-lost sister, a woman who had disappeared from public view decades ago and returned now with a singular mission, to expose Drew Kane for who he truly was. With a calm that could only come from carrying a lifetime of secrets, she revealed the documents, the DNA tests, the property records, the forged legal trails, all leading to one chilling conclusion: Drew was not Monica's true heir. He had manipulated paperwork, altered identity records, and constructed an elaborate lie to claim the Quartermain fortune and status. In one breathless speech, she dismantled everything he stood on. Chaos erupted. Guests gasped. Reporters scrambled. Drew's face drained of color, his posture faltering as his empire collapsed before him. Willow turned, stunned, tears streaking down her cheeks, but they were no longer tears of despair. They were the tears of a woman freed, the tears of someone who had stared into the face of her abuser and watched him fall. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She simply removed her veil, placed her bouquet on the ground, and walked away. In that moment it was not Drew who had bound her, but Willow who had finally found the strength to unshackle herself. And for the first time in months, she could breathe again. Just as the priest lifted his eyes and prepared to declare Drew and Willow husband and wife, a sudden noise echoed through the grand cathedral. The heavy wooden doors at the far end of the aisle burst open with a sharp, resonant crack. A rush of wind swept through the ornate sanctuary, fluttering petals and silencing every murmur in the pews. All heads turned in unison, a collective breath held tight in anticipation. And then she stepped inside, a woman with silver-gray hair cascading like threads of moonlight, a proud and commanding presence that seemed to pull gravity toward her. Her posture was regal, her stride purposeful, and her gaze razor-sharp, burning with the clarity of long-held truths finally ready to be unleashed. No one spoke. No one dared move. The room, suspended in time, watched in stunned silence as she walked the length of the aisle with a steady hand clutching a thick folder of documents. Her name had not been spoken in Port Charles for decades, but the resemblance to Monica was unmistakable. She was Monica Quartermain's estranged sister. The woman erased from the family's legacy, a name once banished in shame, now returned to reclaim justice not just for herself, but for every life tangled in the lies that Drew Kane had so carefully constructed. And her presence was not merely symbolic, it was volcanic. She reached the altar and turned to face the congregation. The priest, momentarily speechless, stepped back. Drew paled, his jaw slack, but said nothing. It was as if some primal part of him had already sensed what was coming. The woman's voice rang clear through the rafters, imbued with the power of a truth long buried. "I apologize for this interruption," she began, her voice unwavering. "But this ceremony cannot proceed, not while deception stands at the altar." Gasps scattered across the pews. Whispers turned into murmurs, which quickly escalated into a tide of nervous chatter. Still, she pressed forward. "This man," she declared, lifting the folder for all to see, "is not who he claims to be." Drew Kane is not the rightful heir to Monica Quartermain's estate. He is not the legitimate son, nor the legal beneficiary of her legacy. His entire life of privilege, power, and public praise is built on a foundation of fraud. She unfolded document after document, genetic test results, forged hospital records, manipulated birth certificates. With each sheet she presented, the web unraveled. Decades ago, in a hospital rife with corruption, there had been a baby switch. Intentional, targeted, devastating. The real heir had died unnoticed, while Drew had been inserted into the Quartermain lineage like a parasite, his identity carefully curated by individuals long since disappeared. And now, the truth stood bare under the vaulted ceiling of this church, on what should have been his crowning day. Drew's face, once smug and composed, collapsed into a mask of horror. Beads of sweat collected at his temples. The once glowing groom now looked like a man facing execution. His hands trembled, but he made no move to deny the allegations. Perhaps he realized denial would only dig the hole deeper. From the side aisle, two legal officials emerged, summoned in secret by Monica's sister long before the wedding began. They approached Drew with solemn expressions, presenting a warrant of immediate investigation. His assets were to be frozen, his titles stripped, his record scrutinized. The audience, now in full upheaval, erupted in disbelief. Some stood in protest, others in silent shock, while a few quietly nodded, having long suspected something sinister hidden behind Drew's charm. And in the midst of it all stood Willow. She turned slowly, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with something approaching awe. The woman, this unknown savior who had appeared like a spectral guardian, had not only shattered the illusion of Drew's perfect life, but also shattered the chains binding Willow to a fate she had never chosen. In that woman's eyes, Willow saw fire, yes, but also freedom. Her own suffering was not invisible. It had been seen, heard, avenged. And that realization ignited something dormant within her, dignity. Tears welled in Willow's eyes, not from pain or panic, but from something far rarer. Release. The kind of tears born not from despair, but from rebirth. For the first time in weeks, no, months, she allowed herself to feel light again. Hope did not feel like a sin. Escape no longer seemed impossible. The pews erupted in motion. Guests rose from their seats. The illusion of a perfect wedding cracked and fell like porcelain against stone. Ushers stepped forward to clear the altar. The priest quietly retreated. Curtis, ever vigilant, appeared by Willow's side. He said nothing. He only extended his hand. And Willow, radiant even in heartbreak, took it. With each step away from the altar, the sounds of disbelief and scandal faded behind her. She moved through the aisle as though awakening from a long nightmare. The veil slipped from her shoulders, trailing behind like the last remnant of a life she no longer belonged to. When she reached the doors, she did not look back. Not at the man who had tried to possess her. Not at the guests who had witnessed her most humiliating moment. She walked forward, leaving behind the white dress, the broken vows, and the man who thought he could own her. Outside, the sky had begun to clear. The air was cool, crisp, filled with the scent of late summer blossoms. And for Willow, each breath felt like the first in a long time. The storm had come. But it had also passed. And what remained was not ruin, but clarity. She had not been destroyed. She had been delivered. After the dramatic collapse of Drew's carefully constructed illusion, the full weight of his crimes came crashing down with the fury of justice long delayed. In the span of days, his once untouchable reputation, fortified by power, wealth, and public adoration, disintegrated into dust. Headlines screamed his name, not in praise, but in condemnation. Port Charles mogul exposed as fraud, Drew Kane accused of psychological abuse and will manipulation, Quartermain fortune built on lies. The truth spread like wildfire through every media outlet, court docket, and whispered conversation. No corner of his past remained unexamined. Prosecutors, armed with the documents presented by Monica's sister, launched a multi-pronged investigation that left Drew facing a tidal wave of legal consequences. He was no longer seen as a charismatic businessman or romantic partner. He had become a symbol of betrayal and exploitation. The charges were staggering in scope. Authorities quickly uncovered patterns of coercive control and psychological abuse aimed at multiple individuals, but most damning was what he had done to Willow. The evidence revealed how Drew had manipulated her mental health vulnerabilities, administering unprescribed sedatives that blurred her cognition and isolated her from friends and family. Through calculated gaslighting, he had engineered scenarios that convinced Willow she was unstable and unfit to parent or function independently. He had fed her fear while presenting himself as the only stable figure she could rely on. This control escalated until she was no longer making choices, she was simply surviving inside a gilded cage. The medical reports compiled by Monica's sister exposed how Drew had hidden changes to Willow's prescriptions and suppressed medical tests that could have proven his tampering. Financial experts brought in by the court revealed that Drew had quietly moved Quartermain assets through a network of offshore accounts, all under the guise of consolidating the estate. The altered will, signed under suspicious circumstances shortly before Monica's death, was ruled invalid. A court order was issued to freeze all accounts associated with Drew. Real estate was seized. Board positions were stripped. He was barred from making any public statements under penalty of perjury. From being a man who had everything, Drew became someone with nothing, not even the benefit of the doubt. He was forced to vacate the Quartermain mansion under the watchful eyes of law enforcement, walking out not as its heir, but as an intruder finally ejected from a life he had stolen. Those who once called him a friend now avoided eye contact. Those who once admired him publicly disavowed their connections. Even the press, once eager to elevate his every move, treated him now as a pariah. Alone, disgraced, and soon to face a jury, Drew's fall was complete. But the end of his story was only the beginning of Willow's. In the quiet that followed the storm, Willow found herself not in a hospital or courtroom, but in a sun-dappled house on the outskirts of Port Charles, safely tucked away under the care of Monica's sister, whose name was Eleanor. Eleanor, once a ghost in the Quartermain legacy, now emerged as a fierce protector and maternal guide. With no agenda except truth and healing, she tended to Willow not just with kindness, but with a sharp understanding of how trauma lingers in the body and soul. She had seen the way Drew operated, seen how he weaponized affection, distorted reality, and left his victims unsure of their own worth. She had waited patiently for years, studying from afar, documenting quietly, building a case that would outlive lies. For Willow, the process of recovery was neither linear nor painless. There were nights of silence so deep they seemed to suffocate her, memories that returned like knives in the dark. There were mornings when her hands trembled as she poured tea, still expecting Drew's voice behind her. But slowly, piece by piece, she began to reclaim herself. Her walks grew longer. Her appetite returned. Her eyes, once hollowed by fear, began to reflect thoughtfulness and strength. She read books she once loved, listened to music without guilt, and allowed herself, cautiously, to feel again. Curtis, the man who had broken the silence at her wedding and triggered the chain reaction of truth, remained a steady presence. He never pushed her to speak. He simply showed up, bringing meals, books, stories, and reminders that she was not alone. Liesel, too, brought her unique blend of blunt honesty and unwavering loyalty. She treated Willow not as a fragile victim, but as a woman capable of fighting back when ready. Between them, and under Eleanor's watchful eye, Willow found the support system she had been denied for so long. What changed Willow most wasn't just the destruction of Drew, it was the recognition that she had survived it. That even when she had believed she was powerless, a part of her had still fought. That the woman who walked away from that altar wasn't a broken bride, but a warrior in recovery. Her sense of agency, long buried under Drew's manipulation, returned with fierce clarity. She began to speak with therapists and advocates, joined support groups for survivors of psychological abuse, and eventually, offered to tell her story, anonymously at first, to help others recognize the signs she had missed. The transformation was not cosmetic. Willow didn't need to prove her strength by pretending nothing had happened. She carried her scars openly, knowing that survival was not about erasure, but about integration. What had been done to her would never be undone, but it would not define her. She returned to work slowly, taking on roles that allowed her to help others, especially women escaping toxic relationships. Her past became her power. Her name, once whispered in pity, now inspired admiration and hope. Drew, meanwhile, awaited trial in solitary confinement after multiple failed bail requests. He remained defiant at first, but the weight of evidence grew too massive to deny. The recordings, the documents, the testimonies, it all painted a picture of a man so desperate for control that he had sacrificed every moral tether to possess it. The community that once celebrated his charisma now recoiled at his name. In Port Charles, Drew Cain had become a cautionary tale. A reminder that evil often wears a charming face, and that silence, when broken at the right moment, can burn down even the most fortified empires. And so Port Charles, a town scarred but healing, found itself watching the rebirth of someone they had nearly lost. Not to death, but to erasure. Willow stood again, not just with her head held high, but with fire in her spirit. She was no longer the shadow beneath a predator's wing. She was the storm that ended him. And for the first time in a long, long time, her future was hers alone to write. In the end, what began as a wedding meant to seal a woman's silence became the crucible through which she reclaimed her voice. The gilded mask of Drew Cain shattered, revealing not just a man twisted by ambition and control, but the widespread damage he left in his wake, emotional, legal, and deeply personal.